If you look at popular culture, seasonal affective disorder is treated almost like, well, like the common cold. Winter rolls around, the days get short, and you just catch it. But if you open up the DSM-5, the official diagnostic manual for psychiatrists, it doesn't actually exist.
Right, not as its own standalone disorder anyway.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're unpacking the surprisingly complex and honestly often misunderstood world of seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. We're going to figure out exactly why the changing seasons seem to hijack our biology, how science figured this out, and the fierce debates over how to treat it.
Yeah, and I think we really need to pause on that DSM-5 detail you just mentioned. Administratively, SAD is classified as what we call a specifier.
A specifier?
Exactly. So a patient gets a diagnostic code for major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, and then the clinician basically tacks on the phrase with seasonal pattern.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so the psychiatric community decided it's a variation of standard depression. It's not a totally separate disease entity.
Which implies you can't just, walk into a clinic, say you hate shoveling snow, and get diagnosed with SAD.
Oh, absolutely not. The hurdle for getting that seasonal pattern tag is actually incredibly high. A clinician has to document a strict temporal relationship between your mood episodes and a specific time of year.
So if my job always lays me off in January, or I get super stressed around the holidays, that doesn't count.
No, that wouldn't count at all. The depression has to be tied to the season itself. And crucially, there must be full remission of the symptoms at a corresponding time each year.
Meaning the heavy depression just completely lifts when spring arrives.
Right. And it has to be a repeating pattern. You need at least 2 seasonal depressive episodes in the past 2 years.
Okay, 2 years.
With 0 non-seasonal episodes in that exact same window. Plus, if a doctor looks at your entire lifetime medical history, the seasonal episodes have to substantially outnumber the non-seasonal ones.
Wow, okay. So if the criteria are that rigid, why demote it to just a specifier? I mean, it seems like if it's that distinct, it should have its own dedicated page in the manual, right?
You'd think so, but that administrative shift actually reflects this massive scientific debate that's been raging for decades now.
About what, exactly?
Well, it comes down to whether SAD is a binary on-off switch that only some people have, or if it's more of a dial.
A dial, like a spectrum.
Yes. The dimensional trait theory suggests that light sensitivity exists on a spectrum across the entire human population. Most of us experience, a slight dip in energy during winter.
Yeah, for sure.
And people with clinical SAD are just turned all the way up to 11 on that exact same dial. So by making it a specifier, the psychiatric community basically declared that the spectrum view won out.
Okay, that makes sense. But to really grasp why they see it as this biological spectrum of light sensitivity, we have to look at how this phenomenon was recognized in modern medicine in the first place.
Yeah, the origin story is fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because it didn't start in some sterile lab. It started with a psychiatrist named Norman E. Rosenthal, making a very personal observation.
Right. Self-observation has a pretty long history of driving medical breakthroughs.
Mm-hmm.
So in the late 1970s, Rosenthal moved from Johannesburg, South Africa, which is famously sunny year-round, all the way to New York.
Quite the climate shift.
Exactly. And almost immediately, he noticed his own mood, his motivation, his energy levels just mechanically dropping every single winter and then rebounding in the spring.
He realized his brain was basically acting like a thermometer, but for sunlight.
That's a great way to put it. So Rosenthal took that personal experience to his colleagues at the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health, Thomas Ware and Alfred Louis.
And they realized he wasn't the only one.
Right. They were regularly encountering patients whose severe depressions tracked the calendar with that exact same mechanical regularity. This led to their landmark 1984 paper in the Archives of General Psychiatry.
Where they described, 29 patients with winter depressions?
Yes. 29 patients. And that's where they introduced bright artificial light as a potential remedy.
Which, where did they even get the idea to just shine bright lights at depressed patients?
Yeah.
It sounds almost too simple to be a real medical intervention.
It does sound simple, but they were actually pulling from an entirely different field. Chronobiology, specifically animal research.
Oh, like hibernation and stuff.
Exactly. If you look at the animal kingdom, the photoperiod, which is just the length of daylight, dictates almost everything. It drives seasonal changes in reproduction, metabolism, hibernation,
Right.
and that entire system is regulated via the pineal gland and the secretion of a hormone called melatonin.
Wait, so Rosenthal was essentially asking if humans, despite living in modern cities with glowing screens and electric heaters everywhere, still possess this ancient vestigial sensitivity to shrinking daylight,
Yes, exactly. He was testing whether we retain that ancient wiring.
like a biological echo of a bear preparing to hibernate.
Precisely. The theory was that shrinking daylight could trigger a primitive physiological shift that, in vulnerable people, manifests as a severe depressive episode.
And his colleague, Alfred Louis, was looking into that too, right?
Right. Louis was doing parallel work showing that light suppresses melatonin in humans. That finally gave them a plausible biological mechanism for how this environmental trigger could physically alter the human brain.
Okay, well, that brings up a huge question for me. If the trigger is literally just less light, what is the darkness actually doing inside the brain to cause something as severe as clinical depression?
The sources dive pretty deep into the biology here, and it apparently all starts with the body's master clock.
Okay, let's unpack that.
The anatomy of how we process time is actually quite elegant. When light enters your eye, it doesn't just go to the visual cortex so you can see.
Right, splits off.
Yeah, a separate signal travels directly from the retina to a tiny cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
The supra... What? That
Well,
is a mouthful. What does that actually do?
Think of it as your biological timekeeper. It synchronizes your internal rhythms with the external world. It governs the timing of your melatonin release, your daily body temperature fluctuations, your mood-regulating neurotransmitters.
So when daylight shrinks in the autumn and winter, that clock receives far less input,
Exactly, which leads to what Alfred Louis called the phase shift hypothesis.
which means the clock is getting confused.
Essentially, yes. Louis proposed that without that strong morning light signal, the internal clocks of SAD patients start running late relative to the external world.
How did you prove that?
His research team tested it by measuring something called DLMO, dim light melatonin onset. By taking saliva samples in a dim room, they could pinpoint exactly when the body started pumping out melatonin.
Which tells you what time the brain actually thinks it is.
Right. And they proved that in winter, SAD patients suffer from severe circadian misalignment.
Okay, let me see if I'm visualizing this correctly. Is it kind of like experiencing mild chronic jet lag, but you haven't actually traveled anywhere?
That is exactly what is happening on a physiological level. Your brain thinks you are 3 time zones away every single day for months on end.
Wow.
You are constantly fighting the physical time zone you're standing in, and the exhaustion and mental fog of chronic jet lag take a massive toll on cognitive function and mood stability.
I mean, anyone who has ever traveled internationally knows how awful jet lag feels. But the sources say the phase shift hypothesis is only half the biological story,
Right, there is a second mechanism.
and it feels even more direct.
Yeah.
It has to do with serotonin, which most of us know is the classic mood-stabilizing chemical.
This is where we look at a fascinating set of PET scans conducted by Kalpana Prashak-Rader's team in Vienna. They injected healthy volunteers with a safe radioactive tracer.
What was the tracer looking for?
It specifically binds to the serotonin transporter, or SERT. SERT is the exact protein that common SSRI antidepressants target. They basically scan people's brains across different seasons to see if the actual physical protein levels change.
And what did the glowing tracers reveal?
The scans proved that SERT binding is measurably, significantly higher in the autumn and winter than it is in the summer, even in totally healthy individuals.
So the brain is physically altering its protein landscape just based on the calendar month.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I need to translate this so I can picture the mechanics. If SERT binding is higher in the winter, what does that actually mean for the serotonin floating around in my brain? Could we compare SERT to like a sort of vacuum cleaner in the synapses?
A hyperactive vacuum cleaner is a perfect way to visualize it. The job of the SERT protein is to sweep up serotonin from the spaces between your neurons after it's been used.
Okay, so it cleans up.
Right. But when you have far more of these transporters active in the winter, the brain's vacuum cleaner is aggressively sucking up the serotonin before your brain even has the chance to fully utilize it to maintain a stable mood.
That makes total sense. If the vacuum is stealing all the feel-good neurotransmitters, your mood plummets.
Precisely.
And it perfectly explains why SSRI medications, which, stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, work for these patients. They are literally jamming the vacuum cleaner so that serotonin stays in the brain longer.
Exactly. It provides a very clear molecular explanation right alongside the circadian jet lag. So we have the internal clock running late and the serotonin vacuum working in overdrive.
And once researchers understood those specific mechanical failures, they could design highly specific treatments.
Which brings us back to those bright lights Rosenthal was using.
Right. The early versions in the 1980s were pretty crude, though.
Yeah.
Patients were basically just sitting in front of massive industrial banks of fluorescent lights for hours.
Yeah, it wasn't very refined. But researchers like Michael and Juan Suterman at Columbia University realized they couldn't just guess. They had to turn light into a precise medical dose.
Because precision is the difference between just having a nice sunny feeling and an actual psychiatric intervention.
Exactly. So the Terman group established strict parameters. First, the intensity. You need exactly 10,000 lux of light.
I want to pause on that number for a second because 10,000 lux doesn't really mean much until you compare it to daily life.
Right, it's hard to conceptualize.
If you, the listener, look around the room you're sitting in right now, unless you are in direct, glaring sunlight, your indoor lighting is probably only 200 to 500 lux. Even a brightly lit supermarket is maybe 1,000 lux.
So 10,000 lux is blindingly bright by indoor standards. The protocol requires sitting near this specific light box for about 20 to 30 minutes.
And it has to be a specific type of light, right?
Crucially, the device must have UV filters. You need the visible light spectrum to hit your retina without causing ultraviolet damage to your skin or eyes.
But the detail that really stuck out to me was the timing. The sources are adamant that you can't just use this light box after dinner when you're feeling down.
No, absolutely not.
It has to be used first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Why does the time of day matter if it's just about getting more light into the brain?
This connects directly back to Alfred Louis' phase shift hypothesis. If the core problem is that the internal clock is running late, that chronic jet lag using a bright light in the evening will actually push the clock further backward.
Oh, so it worsens the delay.
Exactly. The goal of morning light therapy isn't just to bathe the brain in brightness. It is to actively advance the circadian rhythm. You are manually hitting the reset button on the suprachiasmatic nucleus, dragging it back into sync with the real world.
And how fast does that actually work?
When timed perfectly, the antidepressant effects can kick in within just 1 to 2 weeks, which is incredibly fast for psychiatry.
Wow, it sounds like a silver bullet. You wake
Yeah.
up, sit by a lamp, reset your clock, and cure your depression. But I was reading about Kelly Rohan's clinical trials at the University of Vermont, and she introduces a massive twist.
She did.
She pitted this refined 10,000 lux light therapy against something entirely different. Cognitive behavioral therapy adapted specifically for SAD, known as CBT-SAD.
Rohan's trials ask a vital question about the nature of psychiatric treatment. Are we just managing biology, or are we actually changing psychology?
And what did she find?
Well, during the initial winter of treatment, both the light therapy group and the CBT-SAD group showed tremendous improvement. They both work.
Right.
But the real revelation came when she tracked those exact same patients into the next winter after the acute treatment had ended.
The CBT-SAD patients were substantially less likely to suffer a relapse the following year, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of implies that light therapy is just a Band-Aid.
A highly effective biological Band-Aid, but a Band-Aid nonetheless. If you stop using the light box, the winter darkness will just delay your clock all over again.
But the therapy is different.
Yes. CBT-SAD builds lasting psychological resilience. The therapy systematically targets what we call winter thoughts.
What does a winter thought look like in practice? Like, I hate the cold.
It's deeper than that. It's the cognitive distortion that happens as autumn approaches. A patient might look at the changing leaves and think, I hate the dark, I'm going to be miserable and exhausted for the next 6 months, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it.
Wow. That fatalistic anticipation creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of withdrawal.
Exactly. So CBT-SAD catches that thought and forces the patient to restructure it. The therapy teaches them to challenge that automatic negative loop.
And they have to change their behavior, too.
Yes. Alongside that cognitive restructuring, there is a heavy emphasis on behavioral activation. Instead of yielding to the lethargy and hibernating under a blanket all weekend, the therapist works with the patient to schedule engaging, rewarding activities.
Which literally rewires how the brain anticipates and experiences the winter season.
Exactly, creating pathways of resilience that outlast the therapy itself.
It makes sense that such highly tailored treatments are required because the symptoms of SAD are highly specific. And honestly, they are deeply misunderstood by the general public.
Very misunderstood.
People throw the term around casually all the time. Oh, I'm tired of shoveling snow. I must have SAD.
The trivialization of the disorder is a major issue. The clinical literature is clear here. SAD is a subtype of major depression resulting in severe functional impairment.
Right.
If you feel a bit wistful, but you're still performing at work, maintaining your relationships, and managing your life, you are experiencing the normal human reaction to winter. You do not have clinical SAD.
The sources also highlight how weird the actual symptoms are compared to what we usually think of as clinical depression.
Right. They're quite distinct.
Normally, if someone is severely depressed, they can't sleep and they lose their appetite. But winter SAD mimics something called atypical depression.
Atypical depression presents with the mirror opposite of those melancholic symptoms. Patients experience profound hypersomnia, meaning they might sleep 12 to 14 hours a day and still feel exhausted.
And their appetite changes too.
Yes, instead of losing their appetite, they develop massive cravings for carbohydrates, which leads to significant winter weight gain.
There was also a symptom mentioned in the sources called leaden paralysis, which sounds intense.
It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a physical sensation where the arms and legs feel impossibly heavy, like they are literally made of lead.
Wow.
It's a profound physical fatigue that accompanies the mood drop. And because these symptoms overlap with the depressive phase of bipolar disorder, clinicians have to be incredibly careful.
Because of the light box.
Yes. If a doctor prescribes an intense circadian intervention like a 10,000 lux light box to a patient with underlying bipolar disorder, the rapid shift in brain chemistry can actually trigger a manic episode.
That is a terrifying risk if it's misdiagnosed. This feels like a really good time to do some rapid-fire myth-busting, actually, because the sources debunked a lot of things I previously assumed were true.
Let's do it.
Let's start with tanning beds. A lot of people think they can just hit the tanning salon to cure their seasonal slump.
Totally false. The circadian clock is blind to ultraviolet radiation on your skin. The master clock in your brain only resets when full-spectrum visible light enters through the retina of your eye. Tanning beds do nothing for SAD, and they just introduce a severe risk of melanoma.
Yikes. Okay, what about vitamin D? We all know vitamin D levels plummet in the winter when we aren't in the sun. Isn't SAD just a deficiency?
It is a very logical assumption, but the clinical trials are remarkably inconsistent. While vitamin D is important for overall health, supplementing it does not reliably resolve the severe depressive symptoms of SAD.
So it's just a coincidence.
The drop in vitamin D is likely a coincidental side effect of winter darkness, not the core mechanism driving the psychiatric disorder.
Okay, here's one that really blew my mind. Summer SAD. The idea that this only happens in winter is completely false.
Yes, a small subset of the population experiences a recurring summer depression, and their symptoms often mirror the season. Instead of lethargy and carb loading, they suffer from severe insomnia, agitation, and a complete loss of appetite.
Why would summer trigger depression?
The working theory is that summer SAD is triggered by excessive heat or the overwhelming circadian stimulation of too much light, rather than a lack of it.
Fascinating. And finally, there's the assumption that SAD only happens in places like Alaska or Scandinavia. Latitude definitely increases your risk, but the sources brought up something called the Iceland anomaly.
Iceland is a perfect example. It sits incredibly far north. In December, they get mere hours of very weak twilight. Geographically, it should be the SAD capital of the globe.
But it's not.
Not at all. Epidemiological studies show that Icelanders have a remarkably low prevalence of the disorder, significantly lower than populations living far south of them in the United States.
How is that biologically possible if shrinking daylight is the primary trigger?
Researchers debate this heavily. Some point to a genetic protective factor that the isolated Icelandic population developed over centuries of extreme winters.
Oh, that makes sense.
Others argue it's their traditional diet, which is rich in fatty fish and omega-3s, providing neuroprotective benefits. Regardless of the exact cause, it proves that latitude is not strict destiny.
All of these nuances, the atypical symptoms, the genetics, the targeted therapies, they build a very compelling picture of a very real biological disorder. But then our sources drop an absolute bombshell from 2016. I saw this study from the CDC, and honestly, it confused me.
Yes. You are referring to a highly polarizing paper published in Clinical Psychological Science by researchers Labello, Treffenstedt, and Mehta.
Right. They didn't just run a small trial. They analyzed a massive data set from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, featuring over 34,000 respondents.
34,000 people across the entire United States. That is a staggering sample size.
What did they find?
They found absolutely no meaningful association between depression symptoms and the season, the latitude, or the amount of sunlight exposure.
34,000 people, and they found zero link.
Zero. Based on that massive population sweep, the authors provocatively concluded that the widespread belief in seasonal depression is essentially a cultural myth,
I have to imagine the psychiatrists who spent their entire careers mapping out the suprachiasmatic nucleus and the SERP proteins did not take kindly to being told their field doesn't exist.
You would be correct. The pushback was immediate and it was fierce.
What was their counter-argument?
The critics' primary argument was methodological. The CDC surveyor relied on a broad depression screening tool called the PHQ-8. It asks how you felt over the past 2 weeks.
And that's not enough.
No, because it was never designed to track a patient's mood across multiple years to detect the specific recurring pattern of remission and relapse that actually defines clinical SAD.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I understand the critic's argument. If I want to prove a very rare, tiny species of fish exists in the ocean, and I use a fishing net with massive 10-foot holes in it, I'm going to pull up an empty net. But just because I didn't catch the tiny fish, it doesn't mean the fish isn't there. It just means my net was completely wrong for the job.
That captures the methodological critique perfectly. If you average out the mood of 34,000 random Americans, the profound suffering of the tiny percentage of people with true clinical SAD gets completely washed out in the statistical noise.
Right.
However, the study succeeded in proving one vital point. The idea that everyone gets a little depressed in the winter is vastly overstated.
Which brings us back to that dial theory from the beginning. Even if true clinical SAD is relatively rare, the principles uncovered by this research, how light impacts our mood and energy, have actually started reshaping everyday life for all of us.
You see the ripple effects everywhere now. Look at the exploding consumer market for Dawn simulator alarm clocks.
Oh, I've seen those.
Yeah, these devices slowly brighten your room over 30 minutes, mimicking a sunrise to gently advance your circadian rhythm before you even open your eyes.
And it changes architecture, too.
Absolutely. Consider modern architectural design employers pay a premium for office spaces with massive windows because natural light exposure directly correlates with employee productivity and mood stability.
The sources also brought up a really interesting angle regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. When millions of people suddenly shifted to remote work, we inadvertently stripped away a major circadian anchor.
We lost what chronobiologists call incidental outdoor light.
What's that?
Well, when you commute to an office, even if it's just a 10-minute walk to the bus stop or a drive in your car, your retina is receiving a dose of morning daylight.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
When remote work became the norm, people started rolling out of bed, walking 10 feet to their living room, and opening their laptops in dim indoor lighting.
Which must wreak havoc on the internal clock.
It did. The resulting spike in lethargy and mood dysregulation forced many telehealth platforms to start explicitly prescribing daily outdoor walks and light boxes just to simulate the lost commute.
It even bleeds into massive public policy debates. Right now, there's a fierce argument among lawmakers and public health researchers about abolishing daylight saving time.
Yes, that's a huge ongoing debate.
And they're using this exact SAD-adjacent chronobiology to argue that abruptly shifting the societal clock by an hour acts as a biological shock. It triggers mood symptoms and health crises by instantly misaligning our rhythms with the sun.
It perfectly illustrates how a niche psychiatric discovery, literally just a few patients sitting in front of bright lights in the 1980s, can scale up to challenge how an entire society structures its time.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground today. We traced how Norman Rosenthal's personal realization led to Alfred Louis' discovery of the delayed internal clock and chronic jet lag. We explored the PT scan showing how the brain's CERT vacuum cleaner goes into overdrive, stealing our serotonin.
You really did.
We broke down the intense precision of 10,000 lux light therapy, the long-term cognitive rewiring of CDT-SAD, and the fierce debates over the 2016 CDC data. But looking at all of this, it feels like we are constantly trying to medicate or therapy our way out of a very natural planetary cycle.
It does, and it raises a really profound question about how we define illness.
How so?
If seasonal affective disorder is triggered by a fundamental misalignment between our ancient light-seeking biological clocks and the shifting sun, perhaps the true underlying disorder isn't the seasonal drop in our mood.
Then what is it?
Perhaps the real disorder is our modern, heavily indoor, artificially illuminated, rigidly scheduled society, a society that demands we produce at the exact same level in the dead of winter as we do in the height of summer, completely refusing to adapt to the changing seasons the way nature actually intended.
Wow. That's a thought to hold on to the next time your alarm goes off in the pitch black. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.